Where were you born? First of all, introduce yourself.
Sure. Okay. My name is Kye LeBoeuf, and I was born in Bay City, Texas. My family is they're a strong Cajun cultural background family that had moved to Texas. And I spent my childhood in both Texas and Louisiana amongst extended family. We all had a love of the outdoors, of nature, hiking, camping. I was in Boy Scouts, got my Eagle Scout, and just thoroughly enjoyed life outdoors like a lot of kids in the 70s and the 80s. And then went to Texas A&M for my undergraduate degree.
You know, you just glossed over that Eagle Scout. I can't let that go
Sure.
like that. I mean, I was a Boy Scout, and
Okay.
there were many of us, and I don't think anybody ever got above first class.
So it was a push from my mom. She made sure that I stayed in it, and so yeah, I got my Eagle Scout in 1994, I believe. And my project, because you have to have a project for each rank within Scouts, was to help clear out kind of the equivalent of like old aqueducts for some of the missions in and around San Antonio. And so some friends of mine and family got together and helped me do that, and I got my Eagle Scout in 94.
That sounds like a nasty business.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed Boy Scouts. It gave me an appreciation for the outdoors, just furthered my appreciation for the outdoors that my family had initially instilled. And being in a just single parent home, it gave me a lot of structure, a lot of guidance, and just helped keep me on a very positive path, which I very much appreciated. And both Scouts and my personal life had me do a lot of volunteering, which I think later, kind of in retrospect, set me up for a life of kind of higher order volunteering. And so, you know,
Why were you volunteering so often? What did you have a need to volunteer, or was your mother telling you you need to volunteer on these projects? What was
Yes, it was my mother again. It was her influence, her positive influence. We didn't have much as a single parent household and single child household, but she wanted to give me perspective, and so volunteering was the best way for that. And so we do March of Dimes, haunted houses for Halloween instead of trick or treating. We do Meals on Wheels, Habitat for Humanity crews, and all of that made me appreciate what little we did have. But I also found it just really intrinsically good feeling. And so by the time I got to college as an undergrad, I just continued volunteering. In fact, I joined a non-traditional Greek organization. It was co-ed, where all you did is volunteer. So
Wow, I never even heard of one like that.
it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I mean, everyone who was a member was like-minded, just wanting to be benevolent, volunteer, and again, kind of setting myself up for something a little higher order volunteering a little bit later. And during those undergrad years, I'd never heard of Peace Corps, but at Texas A&M, as a very large university, in hindsight, I wasn't surprised that there was a Peace Corps recruiter on campus, and so
you didn't know anything. You'd never even heard about Peace Corps.
I had never heard the words peace and corps together. Didn't know what it was, but I knew about studying abroad. And
let me interrupt here. Barb told me she grew up in Dallas, and she didn't know anything about Peace Corps either. Had never even heard the name. And then when she found out what it was and started thinking about it, she said that the way it was regarded in Dallas was akin to running off and joining the circus.
Fortunately, no one in my family or friendship circles had that interesting perspective, but because I think of my family's love of the outdoors, and then at least with my mom in terms of volunteering, kind of going in order. When I first did my study abroad, she was all for that. She thought it was awesome, amazing, and where I chose to go was Madagascar. So I think I picked literally a place just 180 degrees on the other side of the planet from Texas A&M University.
Mm-hmm.
And being a wildlife and fisheries sciences and management major, an ecology-based study abroad made sense.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
you know, at the time, along with the Galapagos Islands, Madagascar was an ecological hotspot. It was the coolest place to go, and so I thought that's where I needed to go. And I made that work. That was in my fourth year. I spent 6 years trying to get my undergrad degree, and in my fourth year, just before that study abroad, I randomly ran across this person that identified himself as a Peace Corps recruiter. Again, you know, never having heard of Peace Corps. And interestingly, when I came across him, I'm walking down a hallway, can't recall in which building now at A&M, but I just glance into an office and I see a Caucasian male speaking to two men who I perceived to be African based off of their language they were speaking and their clothes. And I was fascinated that this Caucasian male was speaking their language and he was laughing and joking. And I thought, who is this individual?
Uh-huh.
And I had to know. So I came back another day.
You didn't introduce yourself?
Not then, because he was in the middle of a conversation with these other two gentlemen, and I thought I'll just come back.
Yeah.
And I was intrigued. I'd never met anyone who looked like me speak something that I didn't already recognize.
Yeah.
And so I came back several days later, introduced myself, and saw the plaque on the wall on the door that said Peace Corps recruiter. And he explained what Peace Corps was and why he was speaking to these two gentlemen in a language that wasn't, English. Mm-hmm. And my mind was blown. Like, I just thought, this is actually something people get to do. They get to travel abroad, volunteer, which instantly piqued my attention and my interest, and help people grow personally, grow professionally. I just thought all of my dreams have come true. As a kid, I used to thumb through encyclopedias at the back and look at all the world flags, just dreaming about seeing these different countries. Mm-hmm. And so here was a chance to volunteer and see these countries in person, experience culture, language, food, etc. And so the recruiter told me, finish your study abroad first. And so I did that in 1999.
Now, how long was the study abroad?
It was just one semester. So it was the fall of 1999. And interestingly and very serendipitously, I am in Madagascar in the capital, and I run across the Peace Corps recruiter who was recruiting me from Texas A&M. He had finished his tenure, his fellowship as a recruiter and a grad student at A&M. And he took a job with an international nonprofit, and he happened to be based in the capital, Antananarivo of Madagascar. And we saw each other, and we were just in disbelief.
Uh-huh.
And I saw that as a sign that Peace Corps was meant for me. So
was he a Peace Corps recruiter right then?
He had finished his recruiting, and he was now full-time working for this nonprofit.
Okay.
And based in the capital of Madagascar, of all the places in the world, and actually was with the World Wildlife Fund. Now that I think back with that, and so the odds were probably 1 in a billion that we would have run across each other.
Oh yeah.
And I just saw it as a sign that I needed to do Peace Corps. It was the way to combine everything that I enjoyed and believed in, and I just figured I wasn't sure what the future looked like beyond that, but that was the next thing to do. And so
what did your mom think of this?
She was all for it. My mother had a very just kind of fun and adventurous streak in her. Even though she never traveled internationally, she always wanted to. Mm-hmm. My family, for the most part, understood why I wanted to go. They weren't necessarily, like extended family, weren't really in favor of it. To them, leaving the USA meant possibly confusion, danger, whatever, the unknown.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas for me, it was just going to be excitement and fun and helping people. And so I had my mom's full backing, which was nice. By this point, she was living in Canada. She married a guy and moved there. So I didn't have any immediate family in the home living in Texas. And so it made it a little bit easier traveling abroad. And I didn't have anything pulling me back like a car or a house. So I just packed up what little I had with my experience of having studied abroad, an enthusiasm to go back to Africa. Because when I was recruited, I asked, all three of my choices were African destinations. I got what I wanted.
Tell us about that interview. I'm interested in your interview.
So the interview with the recruiter that I was talking about earlier, it was actually a lot of fun. I came in a little bit nervous, but he calmed me down and said, "Listen, you've already got your study abroad, right? That you're set for." And he assured me that my wildlife and fisheries sciences and management degree foundationally would really set me up well. So academically, I was set. At the time, I think Africa wasn't the most popular place to go. And
now tell me the years again.
So I was recruited in 1999, the tail end to begin in early 2000.
All right, so why was that a fairly unpopular place to be in those years?
Well, I think most people in Texas, most students in Texas studied Spanish if they were studying any non-English language as a second or third language. And so a lot of them, I think it just made sense for them to continue with that language and that culture by going on or exploring Peace Corps in Latin America.
Yeah.
Whereas having a Cajun French background, I came in with some French, not necessarily, I wouldn't say the strongest reading and writing skills, but definitely a lot of oral skills just passed down through the generations in my Cajun French family.
Yeah.
And so Francophone West Africa made sense for me. And I wasn't a shoo-in, of course, but I figured I would get accepted, and I did.
You had everything they wanted. You had the experience, the background, the at least beginner's level of French.
Definitely conversational, but...
Conversational. Well, that's not beginners.
Well, easily conversational, but never spoke about anything outside of my regular life. You know, so traveling abroad to Francophone West Africa, it was a whole new vocabulary and a whole new world. And so... but it wasn't a steep learning curve. So I easily picked up on what I needed in terms of French language. And so that definitely made it easier, I think, recruitment-wise, because they were trying to fill spots in West Africa in Francophone countries. And so I had the French, I had the ecology background, and I wanted to go to a very rural area. Didn't want to be in any big cities. Needing to fill very rural destinations. And so...
so this Peace Corps recruiter must have thought, it doesn't get any better than this. It doesn't get any easier than this.
Probably, yeah.
He's got everything.
Yep. So which is probably why he said, "Don't be nervous. You literally are exactly what we're wanting to fill right now." And I was one of only maybe 2 or 3 people that came in with French language background. Most of them who were in my cohort spoke other languages if they spoke second or third languages. So I had that advantage coming in, and I was really excited to be for me, what was in the middle of nowhere, just in a really rural setting.
So what did he extend to you at that time? Did he say, well, we have 3 countries in West Africa, you have your choice, or what?
So at that time, I believe we could pick more or less smaller regions, and then Peace Corps chose the actual country. And so...
I don't understand. You choose a region.
So
You mean a region, and then there are countries within the region.
correct.
Oh, okay.
And so I chose Africa for all three of my regions, and then Peace Corps gave me essentially the choice of picking Guinea, so the Republic of Guinea in West Africa, and I said, sounds great. Didn't know anything about it, and prior to the internet and Google, it wasn't easy to just quickly get on a device and quickly find things out about it. But I thought, I'm open to anything, and Guinea sounded just as good as any other Francophone country in West Africa. And so I ended up just going along with what Peace Corps essentially chose for me. And I can't say I would have been unhappy had I been assigned elsewhere, because if I recall correctly, Peace Corps still reserve the right to send you to a different region in a different country, but I assumed that I would end up in Africa because of the need for volunteers there and the combination of skills and knowledge that I had. So,
And did you assume then that you would go to Guinea? Because that's...
well, yes. Well, I didn't know Guinea yet. I figured it would be Francophone, Sub-Saharan West Africa. And so when they sent me a notification, which back then was via mail, old school hard copy mail, I got my letter, and it stated Republic of Guinea, West Africa. I thought perfect. Did what little research I could on it. And
how did you do that research? Do you
oh,
remember?
Just
Did you go to the library?
Old school library, and I'm old enough to where Texas A&M's library still had the Dewey Decimal System. So I was looking up things old school, dictionaries, books, encyclopedias, reading up on anything that I could. So I knew that it was Francophone because the recruiter had mentioned that, but I didn't know anything about the culture, indigenous languages, the size, the population, the exact location. So did what research I could. And of course, Peace Corps did provide some basic information, on the country, culture, things like that, just to do a little bit of an initial prep. But I was immediately excited to be selected. I was thrilled, and so to kind of include the study abroad, I go on that study abroad, I come back, and I have one semester left, I finish, and then it's timed well to where I start Peace Corps in essentially summer, or kind of summerish of 2000.
Okay.
Yeah, and so...
summer of 2000.
It was, I believe, summer, or it might have been like late spring or summer of 2000 is when I head to West Africa for my training.
So your training was going to be in your country?
Correct, yes. Well, it was going to be in Guinea, and then we find out last minute that due to some infrastructure and resource-related challenges, we were going next door to Senegal, the country of Senegal, for our 3-month training. So we actually trained in Senegal, which made it a little bit difficult in terms of acclimating to life in Guinea. There was overlap in terms of some culture and some language, but for the most part, we were immersed in Senegalese culture and a local Senegalese language, a host family from Senegal. But I still saw the bigger picture. I was still thrilled just to be anywhere, outside of the U.S. And so
It's also worth noting that you're getting even more than you bargained for.
Yes, exactly. I have said that I have multiple families abroad, and one of them is my host family during training for Peace Corps
wonderful.
in Senegal.
Yeah.
Absolutely love them. It was fantastic. It was the first time I had just really intimate, awesome experiences with anyone outside of just Western culture. And the
Tell
family...
me about them, that host family. You mean you're keeping up with them even now?
Oh, no. No, unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep up with them. This is 2000, so again, no no internet, no cell phones that could be
Right.
used to stay in touch. I did stay in touch during my subsequent years in Peace Corps, but then after that, I unfortunately lost touch. But it was amazing. They gave me a local name, which was Gora, Gora, and
Why? What's
I'm
that?
not.
Does it have some meaning?
I don't recall there being a meaning, but I remember them saying, if you really want to just kind of integrate and be a part of our family and our
Uh-huh.
culture, take a local name. And so it might have been, I think, my host mom that kind of
Gave you
baptized
that?
me, yes,
How neat.
as Gora, and so I happily took that name. I can't recall if it had a meaning, but I believe everybody in my cohort in training all was given a name and or kind of gave themselves a name. I wouldn't have dared given myself one. I wouldn't have known what to give myself a name.
Sure.
But I happily took that. I and the time with them was amazing. Just meals, communal meals together, sitting around.
How many were they?
So there was the mom, the dad, and I want to say there were three children, two girls and one boy. The boy was a little older, but there were two youngish girls, maybe like 10 and 11, still
Uh-huh.
at the house. And so we ate together communally every day, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It's the first time I'd eaten with my hands other than like burgers and fries. So
Uh-huh.
I just really enjoyed that kind of communal, literally hands-on experience.
Was there a lot of talking during the meal?
There was amongst the adults. The kids weren't really allowed to talk a whole lot, but
Oh, they weren't?
no, I think the parents just saw them as kind of interrupting, getting in the way of like adult talk. But
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed growing up a single child. I thoroughly enjoyed having siblings. For the first time, if you want to put it that way. And,
Yeah.
this was my family as I viewed them, and they took care of me in the way they would their own. And so I was very happy with them. The only downside of Senegal was it was really, really hot.
Well, before we get to the weather, can you describe the house that you were in?
Well, sure.
There are five, and you make six.
Yes.
How large was the house?
It wasn't large. It was a few rooms. I had one extra room to myself, which I think might have been Peace Corps regulation or Peace Corps policy, where
Uh-huh.
they'd have the family provide a single room with a locking door for whoever was staying with them.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I was the first Peace Corps volunteer to be hosted by this family for training. And
But had there been Peace Corps volunteers in Senegal before?
yes, yeah, there was a long history, I believe, of Senegalese Peace Corps volunteers. In fact, one of the in-country Peace Corps staff was a former volunteer who helped with just cultural knowledge acquisition, just acclimating to West Africa in general. And so it was really interesting and fun seeing people who were recently volunteers and or current volunteers who would come in from their respective locations to help with training. And so we were all in houses probably about generally the same size, maybe 2 or 3 bedrooms, and mom and dad were in one, kids were all stuffed in another, and then we had our own room. So I spent, of course, all evenings with them. Also got invited to some cultural things like local soccer games and things like that, or football, right, as it is known outside of the USA.
Yeah.
So it was nice to have. I viewed Senegal as kind of an easing into Guinea. I would have thoroughly enjoyed Guinea right away, but
Yeah.
to your point, it was wonderful to experience another country, another culture.
Right.
And given the overlap, it was still very beneficial. It was also francophone. And so I was able to
Meaning
use...
you were speaking French there.
Yes. My host family spoke no English, but due to some of their schooling in French and work life in French, they spoke enough where we were able to communicate easily. I did try to learn some local language, but I think knowing I wasn't going to be able to use it a lot after the 3 months, It was a little bit of kind of like a mental block for that. But of course, just it obviously makes people happy if you speak in their language.
It sure does.
And so I learned some basics and spoke what I could in those 3 months. But all the while we're learning the language we'd be speaking in our region in Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
And so full-on immersion, language, culture during those 3 months to prepare us. And so the 3 months...
You're saying us, the plural. So were there other volunteers right around you?
There were. We were in the town of Thiès in Senegal for our training, and we probably had about 30 volunteers in my cohort.
30? And they were all in a fairly small radius?
Yes, all in and about Thiès. Not all stayed. Some left after literally a few days. Some left after a few weeks. I think they just realized it wasn't really for them. And so...
Did anybody get deselected? Have you ever heard that term?
I have never heard of deselected. And I'm not aware that anyone was ever sent home for any reason. Usually, from what I recall, people just chose to leave for various reasons. And usually it was like health or just realizing this wasn't what they wanted or thought it would be. I'm not aware of anyone ever being deselected or being forced to go home.
Okay.
And I think what was the most interesting for me during training was and I didn't have any kind of like sociological background, anthropological, but I loved observing and trying to figure out the other volunteers. I mean, are they like me? I knew what I came in to want to do, how I thought, what I loved about travel and culture and language and history. And I was amazed at how diverse we were as a Peace Corps cohort. Mm-hmm. And not just from academics, because most people did not have, of course, the exact same backgrounds academically. And so just academically, different types of universities, different families, different parts of the U.S. I had the advantage, I think, as well of having that hiking, camping, backpacking, Boy Scouting background to where life in a more rural setting was easy and comfortable. Mm-hmm. Whereas one of my Peace Corps cohort members told me the only nature he'd ever seen was Central Park in New York. And then he got dropped off in West Africa. And I just said, well, good luck. I wish you well.
What did I do wrong?
He did stay for his full 2 years. I was amazed at how different our backgrounds were. And then here we were coming together with this common interest to, meet initially the first of the 3 goals of Peace Corps, right? So you got training, you have knowledge, and you're sent to go help fulfill those specific needs. And
let me ask a couple of questions about your setting there before we move on.
Sure.
Was it a village of deprivation? How would you characterize it?
In terms of the training site?
Where you were living.
Okay, so where I was assigned in Guinea.
No, I'm talking about Senegal.
Oh, in Senegal.
Yes.
No, so Thiès was a large city, and Senegal is very rural. There are large expanses where it's rural, but there are also a few very large cities, and it also has a very large tourism base. And so it wasn't as if we were not running across anyone else from the west or east or anywhere else in the world. But we started to quickly kind of realize like who might be Peace Corps and who's not. Usually Peace Corps volunteers were not dressed snappy, right? And you started to understand what like expat meant. What the various international nonprofits were. Just like during my undergrad years, I'd never heard of Peace Corps. I'd also never heard of Helen Keller. I'd heard of the Red Cross, right? But I didn't know that they would be in Senegal and Guinea and the rest of the world. And I'd never heard of Feed the Children and all these other nonprofits around the world. And so I was also trying to figure out how I fit into that, how we fit into that as Peace Corps volunteers. And I came to really appreciate Peace Corps' role in this kind of larger picture of.
Well, I've talked to the volunteers who were absolutely appalled or aghast or blown away by the amount of deprivation and poverty and even squalor that they saw when they got to that country.
Sure. There definitely were aspects of that. We saw it, of course, in towns and villages, but I can't say that where I was in Senegal that was something that I observed on a large scale.
Yeah.
But again, in Senegal and Guinea, where I ended up spending my actually 3 subsequent years, not just 2, there of course were people in some pretty hard, challenging situations with either health or potable water, politically, but definitely I think for the most part, life was at least, from my observation, it was calm. There wasn't civil unrest. Not at. There were bouts of it in neighboring countries, but fortunately during my time in West Africa, where I was, it was spared from some of the civil unrest in Liberia and Sierra Leone, which that was involving Charles Taylor and related matters. So
you felt safe.
Absolutely. In fact, and I've said this many times over the years, that I've never felt safer in my entire life than in my time in West Africa. And it's a combination of reasons and factors, but I, first and foremost, everyone from my host family to others who were local, who were host country nationals, always made it clear that if anything ever happened, we as Peace Corps volunteers would be the first people that they look out for to help, to ensure that we are taken care of. And I remember one of the reasons that my host mom told me that was because she said, I view my role as just as important as your biological mom, because imagine if my child was abroad and your mother came across my child and my child was in need, I would expect her to help my child.
Yeah,
and so I expect that others expect me to help you. And so I really appreciated that perspective, that the visitor, the traveler was always welcome, fed, housed, clothed if need be. And
that's wonderful.
And it was the first time that I came across a society that wasn't so individualistic and was very communal, very familial, and it felt safe, and it felt welcoming, and it gave me a newfound appreciation for something outside of my host country, or I should say my home country, and so that I very much appreciated the feeling of security and safety. What was ironic about that, though, is so we finish our 3 months, and now we're going to start our stint in Guinea. And I was to be assigned a city in Guinea's forest region, which is in the eastern southern region, right next to Liberia and Sierra Leone. And right around that time, there was a flare-up of some rebel and government force tensions and skirmishes. And so at the last second, I am basically rerouted, and I get assigned to a different location in Guinea. So not in the southern forest region where I've been studying that specific language, because Guinea, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, Guinea has probably about 100 different languages that are recognized,
Wow.
indigenous languages.
Real languages.
And I was studying one of them while in Senegal. And then I'm told, you're actually going way up over here into the foothills of the mountains. And so I essentially arrive at this new location with no Fulani language and culture studies, nor any Malinke language, because both languages and cultures were were present in this new location. And so I just rolled with those punches again in the same way that Guinea just sounded fantastic because it's someplace else I'd never been to. I thought, great, this new place will be just as good.
Well, but I can't help but point out that you're rolling with the punches in a place where you don't know the language.
Very true.
Now, but I wanted to ask, do they speak French there? Do some people speak French?
Yes, absolutely. So Guinea, like Senegal, being a francophone nation, from former, French colonization, I was at an advantage in that I was able to communicate with pretty much everyone that I needed to for relocation, for work purposes, for even in small markets. Your average person at least had some basic French language knowledge to have a little, money transaction, and so I was in a good spot with respect to language, despite the last minute shift in location. So I did make an effort to try to then start learning local languages in this new location, but because my host family was well educated in the French language. In fact, my host father was a school teacher and taught in French. I wasn't forced to learn local language like a lot of my other Peace Corps cohort members, and so I didn't make myself, which to this day I still regret. And so
why do you regret?
Well, just I mentioned a little earlier that speaking to someone in their native language, or at least in a language they understand, is always a feel-good thing.
Absolutely.
And due to what understandings I had of the impacts of colonization and my representation, having a French last name, LeBoeuf, and being Caucasian, and knowing that France was Senegal's and Guinea's colonizers, and there were host country nationals who were old enough to have been young enough that when colonization ended in the 60s in West Africa, they were alive already. So I still, in their eyes, represented their colonizer, and I had a tall order to meet the challenge of essentially convincing them that I was not there to take advantage of them, like my ancestors or people from the West did.
So you didn't wear red, white, and blue?
No, but what was interesting was because France was the colonizer of Guinea, Guineans loved the USA. And I remember my host mom one time saying, "We love the USA because not only did they send you here," and I was probably the 5th or 6th volunteer this new relocation destination had over the years.
5th or 6th volunteer.
Yeah. She said, not only have they sent you here and others, but the USA's never done anything wrong to anyone. And so I said, well, I would strongly encourage you to read some history books and things. Some other parts of the world may disagree. And I said, I thank you for that vote of confidence. But I still represented for them something that was tied to a very challenging past, and where vestiges of that were still very present. And so I end up in this new village called Dogome in the foothills of the Fouta Djallon, which is the mountainous region in Guinea. And the village elders tell me that the last person that they met who looked like me and sounded like me, because my French is not Cajun French, it's standard French in terms of accent. And so they said the last person that spoke like you and had a name kind of like yours, a French last name, he in essence stole all of our trees and left us with nothing. And so, what are you going to do here? And
Did he mean by that they came in and clear cut them all and sold them?
they clear cut their mahogany, and from what I gathered, they left them a few seeds, and they said if you plant these are like miracle trees. They're going to grow just as big. And I remember the village elders saying, "Those are the trees over there," and they were pretty scrawny. And this is decades later, right? So,
Oh wow.
so they were untrusting of me, rightly so. It didn't. It in no way made me feel unwelcome. I saw it as a welcome challenge. That part of my goal was to have that cultural exchange, both on an individual level, on a kind of cultural kind of ambassador level, like a low level ambassadorship. And
So you saw these people who told you that as the leaders. They were the leaders, the community leaders.
they were the village elders, and they were
Oh, the elders. Well,
yes.
yeah.
They were gathered together for a big meeting to introduce me to everyone, and
And then they put you right on the spot by saying,
Absolutely.
"This is what they did to us. Are you going to do that too?"
absolutely, and the person who's the equivalent of the mayor was the one who introduced me. And when he explained my background, which was in essence ecology, and I was there to do environmental education with the school, so integrating environmental themes into the school curricula, but also doing agroforestry projects with local cooperative groups.
That already existed, right?
Correct.
You didn't found them.
Correct.
They were
There was like a women's co-op and a men's co-op doing various things related to everything from textiles to more like kind of strict agroforestry type things. But I was there to help introduce like live tree fencing, composting, things like that. So when this when the mayor figure explained this, one of the village elders said, "Let me get this straight. So you came all the way from the US of A to tell us that if a leaf falls from the tree, that it decomposes and becomes part of the earth." He said, if that's why you came, you may want to go back. He said, "We figured that out thousands of years ago." And then he added, "We knew that when your people," and he meant like who he presumed to be my ancestors in like Western Europe. He said, "We knew that millennia ago when your people were still in the dark ages and didn't know that they should be bathing more than like once every few weeks." And this was interpreted for me because they were speaking in, I'm not sure at the time if it was Malinke or Fulani, but it was a local language, and the mayor was translating. And inside I was laughing. I get what I call the courtroom giggles or the church giggles. Like I laugh when I shouldn't. And inside I'm dying, and I just think, of course, this is perfect. This is so funny. And I believe I said in response just one word, "Touche." And which they understood.
They understood
They understood that. And so I said, "Well, great. I have my work cut out for me." And I can't say honestly that my environmental and agroforestry projects were the most successful. What I realized was that the larger need, I think throughout a good chunk of West Africa, but especially my part of Guinea, were health needs. And so even though I was still tasked with completing my quarterly reports for my environmental education work and my agroforestry work, I took it upon myself to borrow materials from the health education volunteers, because I was, again, environmental education, agroforestry, to some degree community development in that larger kind of picture. And so I borrowed materials like flip charts and handouts and things like that, and schematics from the health education volunteers. And I ended up doing probably about half and half in terms of health education and all things environmental, ecological.
Well, what were you seeing that led you to that conclusion that you needed to be doing that?
So, first off, the village elder was correct. I mean, they already knew about composting.
Yeah.
They already composted, as I'm sure much of the world already knew about composting. So they already composted. They already knew about live fencing. The difference was they might not have had access to the resources that I had. So what I quickly realized was part of my role could be contacting companies to get seeds, to get bags for tree farms, to get certain materials that weren't locally sourced. Because as someone from the West, I could write a company and say, hey, I'm a Peace Corps volunteer serving in this particular country. And then I usually was responded back very well. On multiple occasions, I would receive seeds, materials, bags, pretty much anything that I asked for. And so I realized that one way that I could positively impact the community with the environmental work was to be that intermediary to get materials. I realized though that wasn't sustainable, because the minute I would leave, they wouldn't then have someone to be that intermediary. But during the time I was there, I really enjoyed being able to reach out to different companies or go through Peace Corps to obtain materials, right?
Okay.
And so I was speaking to my role as an intermediary between my village and its members and some work that could be helpful, beneficial. I knew that as someone who was from the West, I could write Western-based companies and say, hey, I'm a Peace Corps volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
I would like seeds, materials, sacks, whatever. I even wrote Crayola, because I started an ecology club for some of the village youth. And Crayola sent me a massive box of crayons. And I knew that
Great.
if anyone from the village were to write Crayola, they probably never hear back, right? So I saw the privilege that I had, and I wanted to use it to benefit the people that I was living with and working with, and I knew that I wasn't just going. I knew that I didn't want to just work there. I wanted to like be a part of these families and this culture, and so to the extent that I could, I really meshed well with my host family. And funny story, so when I get dropped off in my village, and it's literally being dropped off, a staff member from the headquarters in the country drives me there in a 4x4 and says, all right, there's your house, which, by the way, my house was a literally French colonial era fortified little walled home with an aluminum roof. And so the guy with the French last name, who looks French in their eyes and speaks French, lives in a French house. So again, I had my work cut out for me in terms of convincing them that I'm not French. I'm not there to take advantage of them. I'm there for good reasons. But I get dropped off, and he said, okay, I have to go do other things. And so I'm there with my bags in my little bitty house, which might have been 10 foot by 15 feet maximum, just two very small rooms. And I unpack my things, and I'm walking down this path. Like I'm feeling confident to where I wasn't afraid to just walk somewhere near the village. And a woman passes me, and she says, hey, I'm going to meet your mom. In French. And I said, are you? She said, yep, I was the mom of all the past other Peace Corps volunteers. Now they were all women, and you'll be my first son, but you're my white son, and my name is Aisha. And so that's how I met my host mom. She just told me, you're going to be in my family. And I didn't know there had been any past Peace Corps volunteers in Dogome. Again, this was a last minute shift from the forest region to the foothills of the Futa Jalon Mountains. And so I was thrilled to have someone just take me in. And she was a hoot. She was a jokester, really funny. I can only imagine the past Peace Corps volunteers loved having her as their mom as well. And so she said, I'll be back tonight. I'll get you around 6. We'll walk you to my family's little kind of like compound, if you will, where they had three huts of different sizes. So like mud walls and then thatched roof. And she said, I'll come and get you, and you'll come have dinner with us. I said, perfect. And because I'd already had my experience in Senegal with a West African family, I believed it would be very similar, and it was. Although we didn't eat around one large communal bowl, we all had our own plates, but very, very similar food, like rice-based a lot of times, veggies, meat, stuff like that. So I was so touched by the fact that this family just said, without knowing me, but assuming I'm a decent person and a good person, like, you're going to be part of our family. So I got to meet my host mom, then my host dad, and multiple siblings. So
did the other people living in the area then understand that they were your host, that these people were your host mom and dad, and they were not?
Correct, yeah. And I'm not even sure if anyone else ever had the intention of being my host family. Some volunteers, even in a village setting, like where I live, Dogome was an actual village, it wasn't a city or a town. Not all volunteers, even in villages, had necessarily a host family. Peace Corps' policy in Guinea was that you had to have your own living quarters. So either your own hut, or in my case, my own little house. Or if you were part of a family's compound, you had to have, again, a separate room with a locking door.
Okay.
I was kind of by myself in this one house, and so would walk back and forth every day for meals and hanging out with my host family. I never met any other family that said, we wished we would have been your host family.
Yeah.
But I think my host family probably had the expectation by the part of the village to be it, because they were the past volunteers, host family. And I think they were I think they had kind of a position of like respect, because the father in my host family was a school teacher, and that was a very revered position. He was well educated. He'd been a school teacher for I think a few decades, and so he had the respect, and my host mom had their respect. And so I think it was probably never a question that they were going to be my host family.
Did they ever do anything for you that really helped you out? I mean, that you needed? That was almost essential?
Well, I would say yes, like indirectly, and it goes back to the trust factor. So again, I could not have foreseen. So prior to Peace Corps, I was hard science major. It's all I ever read. I didn't know anything about colonization and the history of it and all of that, and other parts of the world. And so there was this major trust factor in my village between me and at least the village elders, and they're the ones that basically, kind of ran the show, if you will. And so every time I left my village, I would come back with everything from maybe some food, things I might have bought elsewhere that I couldn't get in my village, or some clothes that I couldn't get that I couldn't get there but I could get elsewhere, or just something. And usually I had it in some kind of like a travel container. And every time I came back, my village needed to see that I was not trafficking any arms. Nor was I trafficking any diamonds, any precious stones, gems, anything like that, because that's what they understood that the West did, and that was based on accurate information.
Yeah.
And so my host mom was the intermediary. So every time she'd say, "Kye, I know, listen, it's not me, but I have to look so I can tell the village that Kye did not bring back. He's not sneaking in any weapons, any diamonds," because the whole blood diamond issue had been going on, again, with Liberia, Sierra Leone.
What does that mean, blood diamond?
So relating that back to Charles Taylor, which I think I mentioned a while back in this interview, just the sale of diamonds that was fueling the purchasing of arms used in the skirmishes involving Sierra Leone and Liberia. And
Guerrilla groups?
essentially, guerrilla groups or more like rebel groups, and so
Okay.
Guinea fortunately was spared the fighting, but it also took in many hundreds of thousands, I believe maybe even upwards of 1 million refugees from
Wow.
both of those two countries.
Gosh.
And so it was definitely on
During
the
your
minds.
time?
Yes, yes. And so it was on the minds of everyone
Ah.
in neighboring countries, including Guinea. And so, and again, they knew that it wasn't West Africans that were manufacturing arms and selling arms and smuggling arms. It was people from the West. And so, again, I represented someone that they imagined to be those people. And so, I never took offense to that
Yeah.
because I saw it as a way to build trust. And so my host mom was this intermediary to reassure the village that that Kye is who he says he is. He's not, some drug trafficker or diamond smuggler or arms trafficker. So that was an important
That
and
is.
strange
Wow.
role that I didn't think I would be involved in, but I took it in stride because I knew that it would just take time to build trust. It took time to build trust for any of the ecological-based projects. It took time to build trust for anything environmental education related. So I'll give you an example. When I show up with my ecology degree, for lack of a better term, the local school teacher said, "But you don't have an education degree." And I said, "Well, no, but I have an ecology degree." And they said, "So you're not certified to teach, and you think you can just come in here and take over our classrooms?" And I said, "Oh my God, you're right. No offense. I did not mean any offense by that. Just Peace Corps said you will be an environmental education volunteer in addition to other things, and you will integrate environmental themes into the school curricula." And they said, "And you know pedagogically how to do that?" And I said, what's pedagogically mean?" And so they said, "Exactly." And this example is one of many of where I felt like I was learning so much. Every day was perspective building. I felt like I just had it. I realized I had it easy. I mean, sure, I had hardship growing up, but relatively an easy life to where I wasn't ever. There weren't hardships that that made me think critically. And from the get-go, I had to start thinking critically. And I loved it. It felt good. It felt different. I was growing personally, professionally. I even started perceiving myself differently. Like I felt more like a global citizen by this point. And I don't know. Like I started seeing things differently. Like it must have been random that I was born, who I was, where I was born, and so I just really adopted this identity of like global citizen with families in Madagascar from my study abroad, because I had a host family there, and families in Senegal, now family in Guinea, my bio family back in the U.S. In Canada, where my mom was living at the time that I was in Peace Corps, and so the critical thinking aspect really like developed and really kind of came to the forefront of my experience. And which is, I think, it also helped me not take offense to anything that local people asked of me or demanded, because I realized I was part of something that maybe not everyone understood or had experience with, but they definitely had some knowledge of or heard things. And one other side note is that Guinea ended up during the Soviet Union's heyday becoming kind of a Soviet-friendly nation, and so and that meant that some people in Guinea had been educated in ways that made them be suspicious of the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
And so a few people even asked me, "Are you CIA?"
Yeah.
And I had to tell them absolutely not. And they said, "Prove it." And I said, "Well, I don't have any proof, but I'm not." So there were a number of things that I realized I was working against that I had no idea I would be representing, possibly in their eyes and their mind. But again, I took it all in stride because I just thought this is part of the cultural exchange.
Was there anybody who you ever identified who you thought might be out to do you harm?
No, never. Not harm to me personally. I did have a few things, but I didn't secure them well in my house, and one individual broke in and stole my camera, which actually was broken prior to him stealing it, and I never told him that it was broken, and so he took a bunch of photos in the village, charged people for the photos, only to find out there were no photos, and so he actually got in trouble with them, and also for having stolen my camera. That's the extent of any harm done. Nothing personal. Like I mentioned earlier, I never felt safer in my entire life than when I was in a village in the middle of nowhere in Guinea. And I think part of it is, and this is just personal views of mine, but this was a culture where there were really no guns, and so gun violence was
There
minimal.
were no guns. Nobody had guns.
The military did, but
Yeah.
the military was pretty much non-existent. They weren't well supported by France, which is usually who was backing and supporting
Yeah.
and training and resourcing, former colonized nation armies and military forces. And so, unlike the Ivory Coast or Senegal, which had very well trained and well armed militaries, Guinea did not, and so. There was no gun violence. Guineans were a very peaceful people, despite a lot of different cultural groups making up this country. They were a very peaceful people, a very welcoming people. And again, they reassured me that if anything ever happened, that I'd be the first one that they would protect. And so
That's
a
great.
very significant thing happened while I was in my time in Guinea, and that was 9/11. So September 11th, when that happened, I was in my village in Guinea, and again, no internet. In fact, my village had no running water, no electricity. I had to get water from a well every day to use, and so we listened on little battery-powered radios to the BBC or to Radio France International. And someone ran up to me and said, "Hey, some planes hit something." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "No, like where you're from." And they were describing towers and planes, and none of it really made sense. And so I went and got my little radio, and I listened and realized what happened. And my host mom and others came to me, and they said, "Just so you know, if anything ever happened to you, like if anything like this ever happened here, you'd be the first ones that we would bring like into the mountains and hide." And
Great.
when the news came out as to who the perpetrators were of the towers being hit and all of that, Guinea being a predominantly Muslim country, there were some areas that were Christian and or animist, but predominantly it was Muslim. Several village members came to me, and maybe they felt the need to tell me, but they said, "We don't identify with those who did that." Again, we're very peaceful people, we're very loving people, and they said, "We just want you to know, in case you tell your government anything that would make them want to come and bomb us." And I said, "My government,"
No.
"My government doesn't know me in that way. I'm probably just like a number." I said, "Again, I'm a volunteer." And I said, "You have nothing to worry about." But it was touching in a way that they were wanting to just reassure me that my safety was still their number one priority.
Yeah.
And again, I just appreciated that because they knew that I was the one who was least familiar with the local language and culture and all of that. And so, again, never felt safer in my entire life. I ended up actually having a lot of these moments of like cultural exchange and for some pretty serious topics. In fact, after 9/11, as Guinea, like much of the Muslim world, started, I guess, noticing who were the more, what's the word I'm trying to say? Who were the most like fervent in terms of the Muslim faith. My village happened to have two families where the women wore burqas, and that was not the norm. Most people in my village, I compared to a lot of people that I knew back here in the U.S. who were like, yeah, they would go to church regularly. So in this case, they go to the mosque regularly, but they didn't always fast during Ramadan, and when they could go to the mosque, they would. And so they viewed these two families as extremists, like in their own words. Mm-hmm. And one day I came across some people in my village who started throwing rocks at those two families, calling them terrorists and calling them extremists.
This was after 9/11?
This was after 9/11. And the people in the village who were throwing the rocks looked to me and said, hey, we're doing this basically for you. And I said, don't do that for me. I said, not just because I work for the Peace Corps, but just me as a human being, I don't view these people as bad. They have nothing to do with what happened with those towers and the Pentagon and all of that. And so it took a bit, like several days of just chatting informally with a number of people to have them come to the understanding that I had of 9/11. So it was interesting being there at that time because I also had no connection to any of the areas that were impacted directly, whereas many Peace Corps volunteers come from legacy families of Peace Corps, including ones that have strong ties to kind of hotspots for international work, international aid, Peace Corps hubs, including DC, New York, and elsewhere. And several members of my cohort had family members that were in the buildings hit.
Oh, wow.
And so, it was a weird position to be in because I was, of course, impacted by what happened, but yet didn't feel as impacted as others who literally had a father who was in the Pentagon when it was hit, and so
it's really frustrating though when you're sitting in that little place and you hear something like this, and you want to know more immediately, and you want to know as much as you can immediately, and that's just not going to happen.
No, but giving credit where credit is due, there were some men in my village that had a generator that they used to run a satellite to watch football or soccer.
Oh.
And so they told me they were going to get it all running to watch some French-based and BBC-based footage.
Yeah.
And unlike, this is what I've heard, unlike with some US-based networks, things were not being filtered from European networks in terms of like visuals of what had happened. And so I was able to see within like a day or two, just raw footage of what people had filmed and given to news agencies and all of that. So I did quickly learn probably as much as anyone else. But initially, that first day or day and a half, all I had was my little battery-powered radio, which sometimes was a little scratchy with the emissions from BBC and Radio France International.
Yeah.
But part of me was glad that I was abroad when it happened, because I think it allowed me to gain different perspectives on it. I didn't just have my home country perspective, but I had the perspectives of local people. I also have my own from this new way that I identified myself. And so that was certainly something that marked my time during Peace Corps. That is unforgettable. When many people, for a number of years after, would ask, like, where were you when it happened? And I would tell them, I was in Guinea, West Africa. it just
Yeah.
it made him question, what, like, where were you? And
Yeah.
and I don't
You must have been on a safari, right? You
right.
were on a safari.
I think only one of my cohort members returned home because they had a family member more directly impacted by 9/11. But the rest of us all stayed, finished out our service. So I started in 2000, and I'm an environmental ed, agroforestry, community development volunteer for 2 years, and then I find out that you can extend. And
When did you find out? No, toward the end of the second year?
toward the end of the second year, and I found out because I met a volunteer that was in his third year,
Uh-huh.
and he was in a volunteer leader position, which is what Guinea called it. I don't know if all countries call that extended third year a volunteer leader position or time, but that's what Guinea called it. And I realized that job would be an intermediary between volunteers and their host country nationals, be that like representatives from a village or a town, or their cohort members or whoever, and so, but also Peace Corps staff as well. So
Yeah.
I applied for it and found out I was the only one who actually wanted to stay for a third year out of my whole cohort.
How many would that be?
There might have been
30?
Well, 30 made the trip across the Atlantic. And then we probably had about 20 left in my cohort by the time the 2 years ended. And in the same way that I mentioned way back that I didn't have anything tying me back to the U.S., and so I went overseas, I had nothing really, I still didn't have anything tying me back, and so I just thought, why not stay for an extra year? And like I mentioned earlier, I had so many perspective building moments, just where I felt like I was learning. I was developing both critical thinking but also common sense and exploring the world, and so I knew I wanted to stay for a third year, and I was unsure what I wanted to do after Peace Corps. I didn't know if grad school would be part of it or a job, so I thought definitely I want to stay for a third year.
Because maybe something will come to you during that third year?
Possibly, but
But that wasn't the reason that you
no,
stayed.
as I have told my family, which not my mom, because again, she's always understood and supported what I did, but I had some family who questioned just going in general, but then also asking. One family member in particular asked, I'm jumping ahead and then I'll come back, but when I finished my third year and I was back home in the U.S., I was asked, how does it feel to have lost 3 years of your life? And lost 3 years of your life. And my response was, I actually think I've gained 3 years. I'm 3 years ahead for what was important to me. And that was personal growth, just kind of like, again, more of like a global identity kind of growth, and just understanding that I'm part of something much larger than just my family, my hometown, my home states, my home country, and I saw and felt the good work being done, and even though I knew that, for example, my environmental projects were likely to stop the minute I left my village because I was that intermediary for materials, but I knew that the health work that I did would have lasting impact. I understood that to be maybe more sustainable than the emphasis on sustainability for environmental projects.
So you haven't really talked about your health work. You mentioned that.
So what happened was I'm in the village and I realized that sub-Saharan, well, I'll limit it to Guinea. So where I was in Guinea, it was a very fertile area. Plenty of precipitation, the soil was great. The environmental work that I was tasked with doing was trying to address future desertification. And the local populations had more immediate needs than something that might happen 50 to 100 years from now.
Yeah.
And so I still addressed maybe immediate needs, like, sure, they could benefit from some live fencing. but for the most part, my environmental projects were more environmental education, because eventually I was allowed into schools, but never allowed to actually teach, but work with teachers to integrate environmental themes into the school curricula. So
why were you not allowed to teach?
well, I just didn't have
The certification?
correct. I was not certified to teach, and to Guinea's credit, because I think Peace Corps' assumption, which I think it's from a position of bias, was that this is just Guinea, and so you have a degree, and you're going to go there, and they're going to let you teach.
Yeah.
And Guinea said, "You're not an educator, right? You're educated, but you're not an educator." And I totally respected that. I was not going to fight that at all. In fact, once I realized what it meant to be an educator, I knew I would have felt wholly inadequate, and I would never wanted to have done anything that would have minimized and delegitimized the education and certifications and trainings of the local educator, including my host father, who taught at the school, where Peace Corps said you're going to go in there and show them what's what, and so it wasn't hard to not push the education agenda. I did address it informally a lot through the ecology club that I mentioned earlier. So there was a half-constructed building that the village kind of owned, and I was able to get some funds and have a roof put on and windows and doors, and we painted ecology club a Peace Corps on it. And so it's there that I would educate students on environmental related things, more like fun stuff, like drawing naturescapes and stuff like that. But that was also my inroad to health education. So when I borrowed the materials that I mentioned earlier from the health education volunteers, I realized that what lacked the most in terms of health education was reproductive health. It was a taboo topic in general, and it was very taboo for a white Western male to talk about reproductive health to anyone really in Guinea. And so I essentially used the ecology club as a screen to talk about health as well. So I'd begin every meeting with ecology club related things. And then I would tell the students, if you don't want me to get in trouble, then basically don't disclose the fact that we're talking about reproductive health. But the reason why I focused on reproductive health is because my village had a clinic, a very basic clinic. It was just a building with no running water, no electricity, but it had windows and doors, and once a week, a doctor would come from some other place. I wasn't sure where this person was based. They would come and specifically give medications for STIs. And the line for the STI check and medication day, the line of people was out the door of this building. And
now, I know what STDs are, but what are STIs?
It's just a sexually transmitted infection instead of disease.
Okay. Instead of disease.
Yep.
Okay.
So infection instead of disease. And I, again, did not have a health background, nor did I have the French language, like medical background, but having a solid foundation in French, and that was the language in which a lot of the medical staff and others would operate as well. I was able to quickly pick up on the necessary vocabulary and help educate teenagers about their bodies to understand what STIs are. So not just HIV, but others. And so that I knew was having a very positive and immediate impact.
But did you know that this was STIs were a serious problem?
Yes, because when speaking with that doctor that came, the doctor revealed that the same people tend to come back, and it's because they're lacking education. And there was also a trust issue. The local people didn't necessarily trust Western medicine. And so it was a struggle from the Western medicine-based local medical practitioners to provide good medical care, like reproductive medical care. And so,
Where were they getting these? Were there whorehouses, something
no,
like that? What?
no, it was just natural hookups, natural human relations between people, where there was a lack of understanding as to how STIs are transmitted, and also what effective means there are of treating and or curing, because not all can be cured, some can only
Yeah.
be managed and treated. And so I saw that as an opportunity, but a risky one, because had the village found out, I likely would have been told on, and then if Peace Corps would have been told, they would have sent me home. Uh, this was what I was thinking, because
Wow.
one, I wasn't assigned to do health
Uh-huh.
education, right? I was an environmental education volunteer.
And you really had the impression that Peace Corps might send you home for doing this,
Yes,
rather than commending you for seeking out a need that they have there and doing something about it.
well, the reason why I thought that is just because it would have really been a challenge in the village. It would have been hard for the village I think, to have chosen to keep me there, because I would have broken trust with them, because I was there for the reasons they understood, not for other ones. And again, reproductive health was a very taboo topic in general. It wasn't something spoken about within families, between families, many people as well. When I spoke of that distrust between host country nationals and anyone educated in any Western medicine, again, there was that distrust, and part of it was because, yes, medical practitioners were educated in Western ways, but there weren't the safeguards for personal or private health information, and they believed that the doctors, if they were to go and get treated, that then these doctors and nurses and whoever would disclose to others what they might have. So they would basically come to
I
get
see.
very minimally, superficially treated, but they weren't changing their behaviors. And
So
I think the behaviors were part of a lack of education and understanding. So I thought,
certainly it
maybe I
was.
can't impact adults, but I can impact youth. And so I did a lot of work, a lot of educating on HIV and AIDS, and a few other STIs.
But let me ask this.
Sure,
You must have had some pretty good friends there
absolutely,
that you thought you could rely on to give you good advice.
sure.
Did you approach any of them and say, "This is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think?"
No, I never told. I never told anyone, adults or family or otherwise, host family or otherwise, that I was using the ecology club as kind of a screen for reproductive health, and also just some general health work as well. Um,
I
there
think
were
that's so interesting.
there were
I
some
really
things that
do.
I did though that were open and out for the community. So, for example, there was a local youth group. Some were young adults, some were older teenagers who would do plays, little theatrical performances in the village. And it was usually all like culturally based. And I said, what if we did one regarding HIV and AIDS? And so we came up with basically like a script. And they were the actors, and I used some Peace Corps money to help, buy a bunch of Coca-Cola and snacks and things, and I helped kind of bring everyone together in the village. We had in between the theatrical performances, there was a little mini kind of soccer game that we played as well. So the village knew that I was helping educate adults, like again, young adults, about HIV and AIDS, but they didn't realize I was talking to the youth during the ecology club times. And so,
Yeah.
again, the reasons why I think Peace Corps would not have been happy is just because I wasn't trained in that formally, and I didn't have permission from the village to talk about it, and it was very culturally taboo. But I saw it as a need, and I knew that it would be a very, it would positively impact the village, the youth. And it was also just a challenge. I wanted to learn something, do something new. I felt like I had the whole ecology thing down. Health education work was really inspiring to me. I saw an immediate impact. And maybe it's a Western thing, but like we want to think and know that we're having an impact, right? And so I was kind of drawn to that.
Did you talk to any of the other PCVs in the area and say, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I'm thinking about doing?
Yes. With PCVs, certainly. In fact,
did any of them say, hey, you don't want to do that? You're doing good work here, and you're jeopardizing the whole thing.
No, there was none who had that perspective.
Okay.
There were other PCVs who were both health education focused and other who got together though and did like a traveling health caravan from village to village where Peace Corps volunteers served. And they would put on, speaking of theater, they put on little performances to help educate in local language about various aspects of health, general health, reproductive health. Some areas needed reproductive health information. Some needed things much more basic, like make sure that the knife you use to carve that raw chicken is not the same one, if it's not been washed, that you're now cutting an orange with and then eating the orange, right? So some things were really general and basic. Others were very kind of niche, like reproductive health. But so health was a very important topic, and there were health-focused volunteers. But I was not trained in that way. I wasn't tasked with that.
Were you doing this more and more your third year?
Actually, yes. So in my third year, I did not stay in my village. Peace Corps, from what I gather, at least at that time, in Guinea, did not have you stay in your village. When you became the volunteer leader, you were sent to a more like regionally based stopover house where you managed that house. And from there, I would mediate and mitigate communication and issues between the volunteers and where they lived, and volunteers and staff.
That's a whole different assignment, isn't it?
It is, but we also had to have a side assignment, and so I chose as my side assignment health. So I continued health work in that third year.
Was that really almost a full-time job, mediating? Was it that contentious?
So not necessarily contentious. A lot of it was actually helping volunteers who were struggling with just their experience in
being there.
So I'll go back real quick. The one guy in my cohort who had only ever seen Central Park in terms of like greenery.
Yeah.
And then now he's dropped off in West Africa. And so some volunteers really struggled with the environment. Some were in really hot regions. In northern Guinea, it touches Mali. It's the savannah. It's really hot. Some struggled with literally the environment. Others struggled with missing family. And some just missed their life back in the U.S. And so, and then others had others had challenges with food. I was really lucky. Louisiana is rice-based in terms of like Cajun and Creole food, and Guinea's main staple was rice, and I'm like right at home.
Yeah.
So food wasn't challenging for me like it was for others. The rural lifestyle wasn't challenging for me. Sure, I never had to get water out of a well growing up, but I've been camping a million times, and so it was for me. It was fun.
So you didn't lose a lot of weight?
I might have lost a little bit of weight, but all Peace Corps gave us in terms of transportation were bicycles, and I was in the mountains, and so every time I left to go anywhere, it was a workout.
When you were in the mountains, what was your elevation? Do you know that?
Oh, I don't know that. We were only in the foothills, so not the highest.
Oh, okay.
There were villages, there were locations where Peace Corps volunteers were stationed that were higher elevation than me, but it was cold at night. Like every night, it was chilly.
Every night, where you were.
And then it got warmish in the day, but if I traveled an hour away, it was definitely much hotter, going like a little bit north, a little bit further east. So yeah, like environment wise, it wasn't hard for me where
Mm-hmm.
I was very fortunate.
Yeah.
Whereas had I been stationed down in the forest region, odds are my clothes never would have dried. That would have been hung. It would have been humid. It would have been wet.
Yeah.
So it was ideally located, really clean mountain well water, um, and and I haven't mentioned food yet, but the food was amazing. In fact, I'll say this: even though my family didn't have much understanding as to what life would be like there, my mom's father, so my maternal grandfather, told me, "You're going to be able to experience something that few of us ever have," which is, and this is his assumption, is that this place will not have all of the chemicals and the pollutants that we have here in our
Yeah.
food and our water and our air. And he said, you're probably going to taste the difference in the meat and the grains and everything. And he said, you should appreciate that while you're there, because he's old enough to have known maybe a less polluted U.S. of America, right? And
Right.
so that really struck me, and I never forgot that, and I very much appreciated the local diet. So rice based, cassava based, and then the sauces were really healthy with like a lot of leafy greens. So leaves here that we just throw away. Leaves from okra, leaves from sweet potatoes. There, they would make them into sauces using palm oil, peanut oil, and it was just really rich in vitamins and minerals and so tasty. And so I felt healthier than I had ever been, even though I was in theory exposed though to things that I never would have been exposed to in the U.S., like malaria and things like that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask about two
Sure.
other things that I have to ask everybody
Oh,
about,
sure.
and that is alcohol and women or men, depending. Did you ever have a relationship over there that was very friendly with a woman, and you wanted it to be even more than that?
So, well, quick question about the alcohol. Is the question, did I consume alcohol, or was it consumed locally?
Both.
Okay, so Guinea being predominantly Muslim, and depending on how fervent one is and how one identifies with their Muslim faith, they may or may not drink. But alcohol was pretty much taboo where I lived. There were a few Christians in my village that drank like hooch, like moonshine. Which I did not partake because it was way too, just wafting it was strong enough. But I'm not a fan of hard liquor anyway, and and I wasn't opposed to alcohol, but because there was no refrigeration, if you chose to drink alcohol, it was going to be warm, and warm beer is not good. And so I lost my taste for beer,
Yeah.
lost my taste for soda because everything was going to be warm. So really no alcohol. At least on a daily basis. Occasionally, if I went to a larger regional city with other volunteers when we got together for a birthday or a US-based holiday, which wasn't frequent, but when we did, we might have like a beer or two or a few if they were cold.
Yeah.
So alcohol was not readily accessible, and if it was warm, and so not many people drank it.
Okay.
So in my first 2 years, I stayed single, and it was just a personal choice. Wanted to focus on my work and life there. In my third year, when I had left Dogome, and I went to a town called Kankan, which is in the Savannah region in Guinea, which was this regional hub where I was going to operate as a volunteer leader. I met a woman who was Togolese and had grown up in the Ivory Coast, but was living in Guinea. And so I met her, befriended her, were friends for a while, and long story short, after I left Peace Corps, after my third year, I went back to Guinea and we actually got married. And then I came back to the U.S. And was expecting her to be able to come, but due to visa issues, 3 years later, she was never able to come, so we ended up splitting up after that time. But so yes, there was a chapter in my life when I had met a woman from West Africa, and dated and got married, and then it just ended up not working out due to these unforeseen visa issues, which is still unclear as to how or why the visa was never issued to her to come. But that
You
was
never,
a
you
short
never
chapter.
understood why.
No, there was a long delay, and once we separated and then got the divorce, eventually I did hear that that the consulate in Guinea had issued it, but by that point we were actually already divorced. So it was a short chapter, but an interesting one that I just don't have full clarification on.
You didn't have any children.
No, she had a small daughter, but she and I did not have any kids together.
Okay.
And she's still back in Guinea.
What did she do? Did
She
she
worked.
have a profession?
She was like a personnel staff, like a secretary at a doctor's office in Guinea, and it was the doctor where she worked that I ended up partnering with for my third year health-related work.
Okay.
Yep. And his work was very niche. So long story short, female genital mutilation is a cultural practice in parts of West Africa and other parts of Africa, but including West Africa. And he had a goal of educating the local population on the health complications that can arise from that. And he thought it would be great if I were to help him, because as a Peace Corps volunteer, I had certain means and connections as well that could attract people. I could connect with schools, I could connect with midwives and others to help bring them in, and then he would do the educating. So again, reproductive health being very taboo in general, and especially for me as a white Western male, it had to be him to talk to them about it, but I could help bring people in. And so he and I worked together to educate a number of schools and a number of women that had a kind of a midwife role. They weren't called midwives, but they were essentially women that helped in the like birthing process. And so his whole goal was to convince the local women that instead of actually removing any reproductive parts, that they do a ceremonial cut on the inner thigh, just to basically represent what would have been an actual cutting. And that way, it's ceremonial. It's still important, and then they remove the dangerous aspect, the health complications from that, and it wasn't as if the local population didn't know, couldn't understand that there was a health danger to that, but it was so culturally ingrained that it took it took the right person in the right way at the right time, the right place to talk about it, to address it. I have no idea if after I left, after my third year, if he continued with that, but that was another thing that I just felt was immediately impactful, right? Like, we know we're educating youth, we're educating adults about the medical complications of FGM, and it was important for the doctor and for me to address it in a way that was not culturally insensitive.
Did you think that they accepted this compromise?
We met a number of let's say participants who were part of our educated groups, who said absolutely, I'm open to something more ceremonial, because they, especially if they're the women who are usually doing the cutting, they would see some of those immediate harmful impacts, or if they were midwives, they would see later during the birthing process, if you are less elastic, you run the risk of some medical complications during birth, right? And so he definitely, and in my presence, we would see from youth to older individuals who are adults express not just understanding, but a willingness and a desire to move away from that. Again, because it's culturally ingrained, it's hard, I'm sure, to be the one person in your village who might want to push against that and change that particular practice. But that was very meaningful to me too, just because it was something I never even heard of FGM or female genital mutilation prior to going to West Africa. And even though I had no health background, it just seemed like something really positive to be a part of.
Sure.
So that was my main health focus in my third year, when I wasn't helping volunteers with their struggles in their village, when I wasn't having to mediate, let's say, a discrepancy or an argument or some kind of challenge between a volunteer and a host country national, be it their assigned kind of homologue that they would work with or a Peace Corps staff member. So
give me an example by elaborating on somebody you helped out in this way.
So there was a volunteer who lived in who had a housing issue. They moved in. It was I think a kind of renovated, really nice hut, but there was a leak in the roof, and so the volunteer requested several times that her contact in her village mend that, or at least contact the person who would actually fix it, and it was never fixed. So after several rains, which might have been over the course of several weeks, I was called by the volunteer to come in, which was by radio.
Shortwave radio?
Yes, Guinea lacked infrastructure to have a solid sound telephone system, and so a lot of communication was by shortwave radio.
Yeah.
So I got radioed in, but also we also used bush taxis to pass on notes and things. So I was contacted by one of those means, and I came and essentially served as a mediator between the volunteer and her village. It wasn't the village elders, but it was people representing basically the village. So it might have been like the mayor type role, or maybe someone in charge of housing the Peace Corps volunteer there, and just essentially listen to both sides. And help them come to a mutually acceptable compromise, which in this case, it wasn't hard. It was the volunteer needs the hole patched, but it was a matter of timing. I think maybe the person in charge of it was sick for a while, didn't have the means to end up getting up there to actually fix it, but the volunteer didn't want to be rained on, and so it was simple things like that.
So this wasn't just a greedy or lazy landlord.
No, it was a legitimate reason why this person needed help and support in mending that roof. There was another one though where I mentioned that there were volunteers in some pretty remote areas. There was a volunteer who struggled being in a really remote, I think it was the furthest location outside of, from any other volunteer. Yeah. And this particular individual, I think, felt very isolated and was not integrated well into any local host family. I think there were work challenges as well, where this person's work wasn't really as well accepted as perhaps other volunteers' work. And so they just felt that nothing was really going well.
Yeah.
And so when I showed up, having gotten word, not from the volunteer, but I was just doing my kind of regular rounds, visiting volunteers. I came upon this individual who I saw struggling, just looked like they were struggling with some depression, isolation, and so...
Is it real obvious to you?
Oh, yes. And so part of my role was to not just address this with the volunteer themselves, but also talk to the village elders and talk to whoever was, again, kind of in charge of kind of welcoming the volunteers and housing them, and just asking, what behaviors have you seen? Has this person been working with anyone? Who do they have in terms of like relationships?
Yeah.
And it was made clear to me that this person wasn't well integrated for various reasons. And so then I went back to the volunteer and just asked, is this working for you? Is there anything that I can do to help either make it work, or if not, what would it look like for you going forward? Are you wanting and needing to go home?
Yeah.
So Peace Corps doesn't like people to go home just because they want, once they invest in someone going, and there's many people and layers of that investment, everyone wants you to finish because there's a job and there are people involved and goals and plans and maybe some finances and money and things. And so like projects but I was always, in my third year, I was always of the belief that that going home might be the best option for some people.
Certainly.
And so I always brought that up if I felt that it was warranted, like in this case and in others. And I tell them, you have my full support. I'm not going to judge you for going back. Can't speak on behalf of all the Peace Corps, but if you feel unhappy or unsafe or unwell, because again, people left for various reasons, health, family, work, whatever. I wanted to make them feel confident and safe and secure in that decision. So I took that mediator role seriously. What
did this person do?
They ended up staying there full time.
Why?
Yeah.
Did you talk that person into it?
I have no idea if it was me, but I think they were just able to make it work. But in my recollection is this person.
Did you point out some things to that individual who seemed, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that?
I don't know if I was that insightful and that helpful. It was mainly just me listening. A lot of it was just listening to what led up to that, and then asking them what their thoughts were, just trying to elicit from them what they might think could be the best path forward.
Yeah.
So I can't say that I was skilled enough to have had a lot of good ideas, but definitely knew that I needed to just listen and then share that information with the host country nationals in the village. No doubt it was hard being the most remotely located volunteer. I mean, there was probably a good maybe 100 kilometers between this person and the nearest other volunteer, and some volunteers may have been fine with that. There were some who loved being independent, solo, isolated. I would have been one of them, but I happen to have people, I think the closest might have been about 20 kilometers away. And actually, that's one of the volunteers that had a parent impacted by 9/11. Her father, I believe, worked in the Pentagon. And I would see that person maybe like once every couple of weeks at a local market in a nearby town. But some volunteers were just way out there, and I think that was a struggle for some. So I really enjoyed that third year because it wasn't just mediating and mitigating issues. It wasn't just the health work. It was also managing like what we called a stopover or a sleepover house. So it was a walled little compound. It was one building, but like with a wall, a little water tower and solar panels to try to have electricity because the electrical grid
Where did the solar panels come from?
That's a good question. They were there before I arrived, and
really?
I would assume either Europe or the U.S. And if there was enough sun, and if we didn't keep the lights on all night, then we would have lights pretty regularly. And if when the water was running in the city, our water tower would fill up, and if we didn't use too much of it, for showers and cooking and stuff like that, we'd have water most often.
For drinking.
For drinking, yes, but also bathing as well. The tower kind of fueled all that, supplied all of that. The house was equipped with a telephone, but it rarely worked. Frequently calls were dropped, and so we just used the radio a lot to communicate with the headquarters in the capital. If you were lucky if the phone worked to connect with the U.S., again, if you got through, typically calls would be dropped. But volunteers would come in to sleep over because this larger city had things they could buy they might need, or maybe they're traveling through and just wanted to stop over. So we'd have mainly guests from Guinea, volunteers from Guinea, but occasionally a volunteer from a nearby country who would just be passing through. They would get word the Peace Corps people are over there, and so they would stop over.
Yeah.
There was staff. It was staffed by me and a few host country nationals, and so we had a 4x4 there as well in case we needed to go and help a volunteer in some way or transport something or someone.
Was that a Peace Corps 4x4?
It was, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I was never allowed to drive it. We had a driver. That was his full-time job.
He'd just take you wherever you wanted to go?
Needed to go, yeah. I walked everywhere in that town, but if I left that town, I was driven. Guinea didn't have a lot of roadway infrastructure, just a few main roads and then a whole lot of dirt roads. And so you needed a 4x4 to get around. And I don't think Peace Corps trusted us enough to navigate those unpaved roads. Again, a lot of it could be pretty treacherous in terms of like holes and mountains, and driving in Guinea was very different.
So you couldn't take that 4x4 and go on vacation?
No. If I went on vacation, I took a bush taxi, and you were just squeezed in with everyone else, you know. And in fact, they would take out door panels from inside, so they would have an extra few inches. You could squeeze in a few more people, like maybe one or two more, across the middle and the back. There might have been an animal or two in there.
Oh, yes.
And definitely people sitting on top of the car and hanging on the back bumper or standing.
I've been there.
Much of my time in Guinea, like it sounds like I was really busy doing a whole lot of work, which I was. But I'd say a third of my time was waiting for bush taxis to fill up to then be able to travel to the bank or to visit a volunteer or whatever. So this is in my first couple of years, you know. In the third year I had the 4x4, but in my first 2 years traveling by bush taxi was challenging. It was fun. It gave me a massive appreciation for just the roominess of our cars here and the roadways. I remember just pleading with so they were like taxi syndicates, and the person in charge of it was the one that would make the taxi drivers wait till it filled up, and it might take 8 hours for the car to fill up.
Good
and I would beg him, look, we have 7. Can we just go? We almost have 8. I'll give you more money. He's like, nope. I need that extra person and their money. And you mentioned earlier about harm, and the only thing that I think I perceived at that time as like harmful was having to pay bribes when traveling, either with Peace Corps, but also by bush taxi. And so I stuck out like a sore thumb, being a white male right from the West. And so there's this bush taxi, and then they'd see my head, and so you would have someone who would have some kind of barricade up. It could be military, it could be local citizens, and they would demand, even if I wasn't there, they have these barricades up, these little blockades, and they would ask for money. Well, they'd see me and think like, score, we're going to get like 200% more. And I would tell them, I'm not giving you a penny. It's the principle of the matter, no. And the people in the car would beg me, just give them money so we can go. And I'd say, but if I do it, next time they're going to do it again and they're going to ask for more money. And they said, but where you're from, there's endless money, so just do it.
Right. That's it.
And I would tell them, no. So on several occasions, we sat our butts there for probably a few hours because I refused to give in and give any money to the people who were blockading the road.
And all these other passengers were really pissed off at you because you had the money, you could have given the money, and look what you've done.
And the reason why everyone was so certain that it was just easy, like just give them the money, is because in Guinea, like in a number of countries throughout at least sub-Saharan Africa, the De Beers Diamond Mining Company was there, along with other agencies and companies. And they had all the money in the world, literally, to just pay bribes. They didn't even care. It was probably just part of their budget, like bribe money. And so we were lumped into that from the local perspective. And we tell them, we are Peace Corps. We're the furthest thing from literally the millionaires and the billionaires that run these companies and the people they employ to do all of their mining and work. And so I literally did not have that much, but in their eyes, I did. And I did have enough to pay the bribes they were asking for. But it was, for me, it was the principle of the matter. I just did not want to give in. Occasionally I would, but usually I held out, and then eventually they would just give in and then let us go. But yes, I did probably annoy and frustrate a lot of local Ghanaians for that reason.
Did you give any thought to staying a fourth year?
No, I felt like I did what I wanted to do. I stayed, I extended, I learned a ton more. By that point, I knew that I didn't feel confident enough and I guess educated enough to know what I could do internationally beyond Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
Some cohort members certainly did. They had all their like ducks in a row. During Peace Corps, they were already planning their next steps. I mean, they were taking exams to get into grad school, or they were taking exams to work for the government, and I wasn't there yet.
Did you give any thought to applying to the Peace Corps? Not as a volunteer, but
as a staff member?
Yeah.
A little bit, but I felt like after 3.5 years, if you include my training, right, more or less, and then plus my time in Madagascar, so that's a whole semester. So I spent what felt like, I mean, it was
close to 4 years.
It was 4 years actually, yeah, and that felt like a good amount of time to have explored and grown and enjoyed life. And I just thought it's a good time to go back. And so at the end of my third year, I, unlike other cohort members who went immediately, like they stayed and went to work for the Red Cross, or went to work for, one guy in my cohort, he went to work for a French-based NGO, I believe, because he had a actual like French background.
Yeah.
And so I admired all of that. In fact, there was another volunteer who went to work for the UN as a UN volunteer, like kind of the ultimate volunteer. And I respected all of that, but I just felt like it was time for me to go back home and figure things out. And so instead of going back to Texas, I went to Louisiana. And just to be around, closer family and be there for a little bit. Got certified to teach, thinking I was going to go into education. And I was getting certified while working in health education. So the Peace Corps-based health work had a profound impact on what made sense for me to do next. And so work-wise, I got into health education at a local, it was like a regional health education organization in Southwest Louisiana, and while getting certified to teach, and then ended up finishing my certification, and I was going to switch from health education to language education, and then met someone in Louisiana who worked at the Health Education Center as well, but was going to Oklahoma for school. And so we decided to come to Oklahoma together. That person got their master's and PhD, and while they're doing that, I eventually got into health education here in Oklahoma, and I worked for 10 years at Goddard Health Center on the OU campus as a health educator. And I credit my time in Peace Corps for that. Just building that solid foundation and that love and that desire to educate people with respect to their health.
Yeah.
And then while helping students, because students were my focus on the OU campus, while helping students, I realized that I was helping them through kind of internal challenges, and I questioned, what if I could help multiple people work through not just health challenges, but life challenges. And so I got into, I started exploring mediation, and I got certified by the state of Oklahoma through their court system to do court-based mediation. And around that same time, this is, again, after 10 years of health work at OU on the Norman campus, an opportunity came up to work for student conduct on the OU campus, where my focus would be conflict resolution, so alternative conflict resolution. So separate from adjudicating, which is when there are code violations, there's a whole host of other behaviors that fall in the conflict realm. So not conduct, but conflict. Mm-hmm. And so I saw this as an amazing opportunity to use the foundation that I had from my health work to build upon that and help people work through and elicit from them their own solutions to conflict. And it may not be a surprise, but there's way more conflict in life than like behavioral issues and conduct issues. And so so I currently serve as an assistant director for student conduct on the OU Norman campus, where my focus is alternative conflict resolution. And so my job is to build from the ground up and implement and oversee a spectrum of alternative conflict resolution services, so everything from assisted dialogue to mediation to restorative practices to shuttle diplomacy. So things that happen on a much larger scale, but now like on a very small scale. So between students on campus, between students and staff or students and faculty. And I credit my desire and love of this from the very beginning. So my mom instilling in me the not just the feel-good side of volunteering and benevolence, but also just the fact that it helps people, and that however you feel in your life, whatever position you think you're in, there's always someone worse off who could benefit from some help, from a hand, a hand up. And so, and then my time in Peace Corps, building upon that, to then where I am today. And so, for me, coming full circle to work in conflict resolutions, very meaningful, and to kind of further my my foundational knowledge, because I have a science background and then some health background. In my ripe old age of 47, I thought it'd be a great idea to start a second master's degree in peace studies, and so I'm currently pursuing that. And I feel like I've found my
peace studies at OU.
No, actually, it is through Oklahoma State University has an online master's program. It's interdisciplinary studies. It's an MS and IS, and you craft it to what you want. And so I am pulling together courses from various disciplines through OSU and making it a peace studies program. So I'm currently enrolled in a course, a PhD level course, even though I'm a master's level. It's an international peace curriculum development course. So I feel like I've found my people. It's amazing to be around those that are involved in peace studies, conflict studies, to see the work that they're doing. It's just amazing. It's again, for me, it's kind of coming full circle, but yet still kind of building upon everything that I've done from childhood to now. And so I feel very privileged. I feel very fortunate to be where I am. And I wouldn't be here had it not been for certain people instilling in me certain values, and then people taking care of me when I was abroad, people taking care of me here. And so I feel like the least I can do is help people work through just challenges in life and conflict in life.
Perfect.